After 2 long years of waiting, Shadow of the Erdtree is finally upon us. If you know anything about FromSoft and Elden Ring in general, you know this game was a big deal. It was a monumental success both critically and commercially when it released in 2022, and was a huge step up for From Software as a studio. I've never been a massive FromSoft head, but I've played all of their Souls games starting with Demon Souls on the PS3. But Elden Ring made me fall in love with their games in a new way. It focuses a lot less on the linearity of previous titles and puts more emphasis on wanting the player to dig deep into the world and explore everything it has to offer. For me, it was a very exhausting experience, but also incredibly rewarding at the same time. When Shadow of the Erdtree was announced, I think many people expected it to be more of the same Elden Ring goodness, and when it came out, it really was. This expansion has been in the works for quite some time, but the wait seems to have been worth it. It launched with enough content to basically be a whole new game's worth, with so much to do and explore and die, and it just goes to show you that FromSoft really is one of the better developers on the market right now, because they always want to one-up themselves and deliver something that outshines what came before. The expansion was received really well. I mean, of course it was. It's a FromSoft game, but it also received some criticism for a very odd reason. A decent amount of people thought the expansion was too hard, or to put it more succinctly, many people felt the expansion was hard just for the sake of being hard. Now that's a bit of a head scratcher, isn't it? FromSoft games are supposed to be hard, aren't they? People come to these games in droves because of the difficulty. They crave the challenge. So that got me thinking long and hard about game difficulty. Game difficulty is a topic that seemingly has no conclusive discussion because difficulty as a design concept isn't one with a singular answer. And when it comes to FromSoft games, the discussion about difficulty has always been at the forefront when discourse appears with these games. These are games that are defined by their difficulty and are arguably where they are now in the cultural consciousness because they made being hard enjoyable in their own way. FromSoft created a brand new genre, one where the brutal difficulty defines it, the Soulslike, and now that's what they are known for. But we are finally at what feels like a tipping point for the discussion for FromSoft games, in particular with the release of Shadow of the Erdtree and the backlash that followed, where many people felt like the expansion was just hard for the sake of being hard. It's a very touchy topic for a lot of people because for them, they derive a lot of self-worth from being perceived as good at video games, and completing a FromSoft game is like a badge of honor to them. Like, I can see where those types of people are coming from, and I love digging into tricky topics like this because there's a lot of nuance that can be gleaned by doing it. So let's ask the question, when is hard too hard in a game? It's a hard question for a hard topic because it's a question where there really isn't an answer. But let me try my best to explain why. But before we do that, it would mean a lot if you could like the video and subscribe if you want to see more gaming essays like this in the future. Now, let's begin. In order to get into the weeds of what difficulty means, we have to pick apart what makes something difficult. According to Merriam-Webster, to be difficult is to be hard to do, make, or carry out. So by this definition, we can make the conclusion that difficulty is inherently subjective. I know people will probably have an issue with that statement, but it really is true. Telling someone to get good only goes so far because not everybody has the same idea of what makes it hard. I could have trouble with one boss, but you could wipe it out first try. You could be absolutely baller with rolling times, but when it comes to positioning during a fight, everything goes downhill really fast. Difficulty is something that comes along with every game ever designed. Whether it be tic-tac-toe or chess, it is something inherent in the act of play itself, and Souls games are no different. FromSoft's RPGs are very unique games in the gaming landscape because they are Japanese RPGs that take a lot of influence from Western RPGs and action games, and the way Elden Ring and Dark Souls play pose a very interesting interaction between RPGs and action games because the RPGs influence the action in real time. You can grind for levels in a FromSoft game, but they don't have as much influence on the outcome as a turn-based RPG would. These games allow the player to level, but the improvements are very gradual and take time to really come into picture. Instead of having a major influence on numbers, these stats mostly focus on what a player can use via weapons and spells and armor and how proficient their character is in using them. So how you allocate your stats influence how you ultimately play. All in all, the stats have an influence on your success, but they don't define if you win or lose. Your playing does. The games expect you to be able to dodge, parry, block, and work on your positioning in order to succeed during these fights, depending on your playstyle, but it also expects you to use the stats you selected and make sure that you are using them optimally via the weapons and armors that you choose. The idea that these games are so open to different playstyles yet being so difficult is what makes them so appealing, if you ask me. there are commonly known builds that make the game quote-unquote easier, like a caster build, but that's just because it's a type of build that puts emphasis on dealing damage from a distance rather than up close to a boss. The combat in Souls games has always been deemed fair in many ways that make reacting to combat very manageable. Animations give the player enough tell to know how to move and play accordingly. Enemies have enough health to make sure that fights don't last longer than they need to, and overall they're tuned in a way that makes sure that you at least know how to fight them in order to succeed. And in order for a game to feel fair, the player has to understand why they failed at something and to have the tools they require in order to tackle the problem when it comes up in the future. Souls games bosses are probably the epitome of fair bosses. Their moves are always telegraphed in these huge, larger-than-life animations to let you know something big is coming your way. But now it's just up to you to learn how to dodge it. I think out of all the FromSoft games I have played, Sekiro holds up as my favorite. It deals away with the RPG mechanics of previous games and focuses purely on the experience of a limited pool of combat weapons and being fully engrossed in it. It's a game that ditches multiple playstyles and puts emphasis on one, requiring mastery over one weapon, that being your katana. The game lets you upgrade the wolf in other ways, but the main way you're going to be dealing damage is with the katana. I remember very distinctly during my playthrough enjoying the game until I got to Genichiro Ashina. This boss, for me, breaks down FromSoft boss encounters down into its bare essentials. The boss has a move pool, but it's up to you to learn how to counter each move he throws at you. There is a bit of player expression involved in learning how to counter the moves, but they require you to find your own way of dealing with them. The first couple encounters were a wash for me, and let me tell you, I was not doing so hot. I was a fucking mess. This boss kicked my ass for a week straight, but I kept going, and as I continued, I started picking up on little details here and there. Like I can hit him a few times in this window, and he takes a break after this attack that gives me time to heal. And if I don't need to heal in this window, I can go for a jumping attack to close the gap. Each boss fight in FromSoft games is like this, but this fight is the one that finally made me understand the appeal of them. The process of learning and overcoming adversity is what makes players keep coming back. And doing so leads to some of the most rewarding feelings you can get while playing a game. It's like learning a song on an instrument, except your instrument is your sword and the song is the death of your enemy. After I completed the fight, I was riding high. I felt like I could tackle anything the game could throw at me at that point, but I stopped playing. I got what I wanted out of the game, but I just didn't think I had another fight like that in me. It exhausted me for sure, but the game really had an impact on me, and it's a gaming moment I remember all of these years later because it was something that I really had to fight for in order to succeed. Difficulty is, ironically, a very difficult thing to balance. It's all about finding that sweet spot in between boredom and frustration, because if a game is too easy, you begin to lose engagement with it. And if a game is too hard, then it feels like you're not making any progress, and each encounter feels like a roadblock. And in the ancient words of a former Nintendo president, if it's not fun, why bother? These words ring out fairly often when discussing game discourse because I think they have a merit of truth to them, but fun isn't the only emotion we derive from games. Games can elicit frustration and happiness and sadness, but the emotions that the games elicit all depend on the director's intent on how the game plays and the experience they're attempting to portray. Many games have different solutions to the difficulty conundrum, but I think one of the most famous examples of difficulty always keeping you on your toes is Resident Evil 4. RE4 was a breakthrough in many aspects, but difficulty is one that a lot of people don't really think about. When RE4 released, it had a system that dynamically affected combat in a way that would either buff or debuff enemies depending on how well you played. If, for example, I was playing really well and hit all of my shots, then the enemies would become more aggressive and charge me. Making sure the players stay in that sweet spot of a flow state is a goal of every developer. But then you have games where the difficulty is not great. You know it, I know it, we've all come across games like this. It's a little thing called artificial difficulty. When a game just does something so bullshit, so dumb, that you can't keep playing anymore. Artificial difficulty comes in many forms, but I'd like to think we know it when we see it, or rather, when we don't see it. One way to assess if something is artificially difficult is when you, as a player, are unable to learn why you failed at something. This is a vital part of the discussion because when a player is unable to see what went wrong, they're unable to reflect and and process what they did that made them lose in the first place. They are unable to learn how to react when they come across the situation again, and they maybe aren't given the tools they need in order to get themselves out of said situation. Another form of artificial difficulty would be number bloat. If you've played any RPG in your life, you know this one well. It's a genre staple. RPGs by nature are very number heavy experiences, so any bad math in these games can easily ruin a good experience. This used to be a pretty common occurrence with older games, but RPGs would often use number bloat as a way to gate certain encounters or make them more difficult for pacing purposes and to make sure you play the game longer than was needed. I think one of the more egregious examples of this in recent years would be the Assassin's Creed RPGs, namely Odyssey and Valhalla. Both of these games used leveling as a way to gate story progression, and it required the player to sink tens of hours into the game in order to level at a decent pace. Unless you paid for the XP boosters with real cash money, of course, but those microtransactions are a topic for another video altogether. These are just a few examples of artificial difficulty, but when I see things like this, I can tell that is when good difficulty goes bad. And I think if we really get into the nitty-gritty of it, I can classify it as bad because it is something that the player cannot control. Games are all about player input, like we discussed earlier. And when you take the control out of the player's hands and make them interface with problems they don't have the tools they need in order to solve them, I think that's where a lot of people draw the line. The agency of the player is being removed, and it just feels horrible to play something where it feels like you don't have any input in the outcome just because number's small and enemy number big. It's not a test of skill, it's a math problem at that point, and the numbers don't lie. Thankfully, RPGs have come a long way and number balancing has kind of evened out over the years, but there are still pretty large mainstream examples of this happening. Speaking of numbers and stats in RPGs and Elden Ring in general, it's worth looking into builds and the meta. RPGs, being the games they are, rely heavily on the numbers, and this applies to everything the player interacts with in leveling their builds. Sid Meier, creator of the Civilization series, said, quote, "Players will always optimize the fun out of a game, so one of the responsibilities of designers is to protect the player from themselves," end quote. It's a classic quote, really, but what happens when you need to optimize the game in order to have fun? Then the question gets flipped upside down. What happens when all of the systems in place are so jumbled that it requires a math degree to solve a game? Thankfully, this isn't something that happens with Elden Ring, but it gets awfully close to that point with Shadow of the Erdtree and how it requires players reach a logical endpoint of their builds in order to see consistent success. And when your build isn't consistent, you can see the missteps in your plan, and the game, being as hard as it is, puts emphasis on every little mistake. So as a player, you end up feeling not so great when a character you devoted a lot of time into isn't up to snuff just because the numbers aren't adding up. It's never a good feeling. When all of those factors are considered as a cohesive whole, fairness is what we lose when artificial difficulty takes over. Fairness is that secret spice that makes difficulty enjoyable. And fairness in this situation can be equated to player control. When something is fair, you have input over it, which is why I think a lot of players, myself included, take issue with multiplayer game balancing, for instance, because they are unable to control how other players use the weapons and strategies they have. So players are constantly up against something they don't always have the answer to, making it unfair in the process. Other players are simply too unpredictable in order to play efficiently against, and that's not something developers are always equipped to balance. Developers may have data, but metas will always reign supreme. And when the meta is in the game, that's the sign of bad design, because no one option should always be the best one. But in numbers-based games, that's really the natural conclusion. And when metas hit the mainstream, it wreaks havoc on the player base, because people just want to play the way they want to. And when they're unable to compete with the numerically best option, they lose part of their autonomy as a player. But why would a developer make a game that way? Why would a developer make a player lose their autonomy in a medium that's dependent on the player in order to be experienced? Well, I don't think it's that simple. I don't think a developer ever starts with intentionally pulling autonomy away from the player, but it is a byproduct of a lack of foresight on the developer's part. Games are notoriously difficult to program, and sometimes the numbers that make sense on their end don't always make sense to the player. They are looking more on the inside of the game, but players cannot see that and will happily tear it apart piece by piece, exposing everything wrong with it. That's just how games are. But when the consumer does this, breaks apart the art in question down to its barest essentials, it's always important to examine the creator's intent with a piece. FromSoft can very much attribute a lot of its success to the game direction of Hidetaka Miyazaki, who is intent on delivering a very specific gameplay experience with each game he develops. develops. Artist intent is a very strange topic when it comes to games because they are one of the only mediums where the consumer has to actively engage with them in order to proceed. Unlike books and movies, the player has to be an active participant in the product and therefore has a role to play in how it is perceived. It's also a medium where how one engages with it becomes an art form in and of itself, like how many competitive games are shaped by how those in the higher brackets play them. Gaming is a form of self-expression because no one plays them the same way. That is inherently how play functions. But you could also say the same for interfacing with books and movies as well, because people will derive things from those pieces of media that I won't, because we all have different life contexts. We're getting kind of meta, aren't we? Can you tell I went to art school? Anyway, Miyazaki's intent as a creator is to make games that he enjoys playing, and there is merit in that. He's chasing the same high you are as a player, and he knows very, very well that not everyone plays like he does. He's always attempting to one-up the encounter design in his games because he knows that there are others that are better than him, and he wants to give the player that same sense of accomplishment with each new entry he develops in the FromSoft catalog. I'm sure he knows that if they made samey boss designs and fights similar to what people had experienced before, the games would lose a lot of their appeal. In a recent interview with Game Informer, Miyazaki gives some insight on how he's very in-depth with boss encounter design. He said, quote, "There is certainly a lot of surprise, especially when watching content from really, really good players," he says. "We design certain experiences with the intent of, oh man, I'm sure they're gonna have a tough time with this, but somehow these players always are able to overcome all the obstacles with their skill. With regards to difficulty, I know we get a lot of credit for saying, yeah, our games are difficult, but it's not a matter of simply cranking up the difficulty, it's doing so fairly. When players are killed, they can understand why they were killed in an instance, and it feels justified." Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's the game design we're trying to achieve. I know a lot of players out there are probably going to disagree. What are you talking about? This game doesn't make sense. What the heck? But we try to make sure that there is a learning curve and a feedback loop that the players are able to extract from that they can then bring into the next attempt. We believe in difficult games, but not games that are unjustly or unfairly so. But of course, there's still room for improvement on our side as well." End quote. Miyazaki is a very hands-on director when it comes to game development. His touch is very present in every game he develops, and you can really see and feel his vision because of his input. It's what makes him so important as both a creative and an auteur in the gaming space. He makes games like no one else, and it is just another reason why his input is so valuable in all the projects he works on. One thing I think Miyazaki does when he makes games is to make them a leveled playing field as best as he can, to make them experiences where everyone of varying skill levels can come together to face the same challenge, but to do it in their own ways. We see this with a lot of meme runs, like people beating the game with a Guitar Hero controller, or even beating every single Soulsborne game in a row without taking a single hit. That gamers as a community can rally behind the same feeling of accomplishment in these difficult games is something to be really proud of as a director. There's something really beautiful about that. So I'm going to go out and say that yes, the creator's intent does matter when it comes to games and how they take shape in terms of difficulty, because ultimately it is their vision that informs the end product. It informs how the world is shown to the player, how the vibe is interpreted in the end product, and ultimately how they experience them as a whole. But like other artistic mediums, the director has no context on how experienced people are who play their games in the first place. You and I'm sure, play very different games, and we both get very different things out of them. Very recently, the game director for Helldivers 2, Johan Pilestedt, said the following on twitter.com, saying, quote, "A game for everyone is a game for no one. Always cater to a select audience." And it really couldn't be any more true. When you sit down to make something that pleases everyone, you end up pleasing no one. As a way to visualize the concept, it casts a net that's too wide to catch any fish. Like Ubisoft games, for instance. I gotta make jabs at Ubisoft every chance I get. Let me have this. So let's talk about expectations here for a second. When it comes to FromSoft games, we understand that they are difficult and that Miyazaki designs these games with the intent for them to be difficult but fair. And when we look at expansions for FromSoft games, we understand that they are even more difficult than the base game. But it's also not every FromSoft game where the expansion is locked behind a very difficult boss fight in their original base game, like a sort of skill check before you progress. This might have been a very literal bad omen for many people attempting to get into the expansion, as they are told they have to fight one of the hardest bosses from the main game. I think something can be said about how this method ultimately gatekeeps content away from from those that purchase it. And when people finally come into contact with that content, they're also expected to engage with it according to the game's rules. People bought the expansion knowing it would kick their ass. They know Elden Ring is a type of game where you need to explore in order to acquire gear, items, and charms that make your build come to life. But the way many people interface with the expansion, they did not engage with the game on the game's rules, but their own. Players did not want to explore to get the Erdtree blessings that you need to buff yourself for combat encounters. Players didn't want to do this so bad that FromSoft had to come out and directly tell the players where to find them and how to use them. Never in my life have I seen a developer try to handle damage control like this for a game before. It's the developers telling the player to actually engage with one of the primary systems in order to succeed. I don't know, man. It's just such a funny situation to me. A lot of Souls-like players take a lot of pride in their accomplishments in these games, and for good reason. They are really difficult games that reward you for mastering difficult content. But for a player base that's so up their own ass about saying get good when faced with adversity, and that's too much for them, I can't help but enjoy the sweet, sweet tears. But I also think this might have been an issue with how the game sold its systems to the player. The game expansion relies very, very heavily on acquiring the Erdtree blessings, which are items unique to the expansion and serve as its own independent upgrade system away from leveling. These are items that affect every aspect of your character in the new expansion area, including attack power, damage mitigation, and even resistances to afflictions. These are giga important pickups that the player will need in order to explore and play the game to its fullest extent, and the players either did not want to engage with the system, or the system was not fully explained in detail how important it was to the overall experience. I know for many people, exploration is not the most important part of Elden Ring to them. They're in it for the boss fights, and when those people are forced to engage with systems they don't want to, there's a lot of friction to be gained by doing something like that. It feels like the discussion is going back to expectations, isn't it? And like every other FromSoft expansion, it's one that demands mastery over the base game systems. That means knowing your frames, your healing potential, your build, and how to use your weapon efficiently in the face of adversity. It's an expansion that really pushes you to your limit and even pushes the game's limits as well. The systems are at their tipping point with this expansion, really emphasizing what makes them great and terrible at the same time. One of the very first patches FromSoft issued for Shadow of the Erdtree was one that actually makes the scaling of the Erdtree blessing stronger in the early game as a way to make attempting difficult encounters easier at an earlier time. And this is a difficult but necessary change by the developers because they want people to keep playing and to love the game. But it's clear that the Erdtree system was one that just seems like it didn't hit like it was supposed to. And now they're having to backpedal on the concept in order to flip the public narrative back on its head. Now, let's face it, there's a point where art has to intersect with capital. When you are in the business of games, you still have to make people want to buy them. It's just the nature of doing business. It's very difficult for art to exist under capitalism, so you have to find the middle ground where both go hand in hand. And with a game as big as Elden Ring, Bandai Namco has to make sure that people want to play it. So making changes to the experience that make people stay for longer and get less frustrated are necessary. And the backlash the game has experienced thus far has really cemented this mindset. At that point, the artist's intent does not matter anymore. Now it's about making sure people want to keep playing in order to secure capital. It's the grim reality of the situation. In a recent article with The Guardian written by Keza McDonald, they interviewed Miyazaki before the release of Shadow of the Erdtree, and he had this to say about risk management in a project as big as Elden Ring. He said, quote, "Budgets, scale, scope, everything has grown to a point where room for failure isn't tolerated as much as I think it was in the past. From Software has its own way of hedging risks, so to speak, in that most of our projects have a partner who is financing the project. From a business management perspective, we're not betting everything on any one single project. At the same time, you have to find the right project to allow for failure, whether it's smaller in scope or scale, or it's a small module within something bigger. There needs to be room for that," end quote. So Shadow of the Erdtree is really in this special situation. It's this straw that broke the camel's back situation where all of these miniature friction points are stacking up to make something that people are getting really frustrated by. Even if it was Miyazaki's intent to make the expansion that way, he wanted to gate it behind a difficult boss and introduce the Erdtree blessings and revered spirit ashes, and that direction is getting in the way of money for the first time in FromSoft's history of making a Soulslike. So in this case, I think that yes, the game was too hard for a decent chunk of the player base, and both FromSoft and Bandai Namco were forced to do damage control because their revenue was was at stake. It's such an interesting niche case scenario that I think will be talked about for a long time. In another attempt to get a deeper understanding of the question in general, I also took to my community tab in order to gauge the question, a yes-no question on if a game can be too hard. And the response was rather informative. Out of about 440 votes as of time of writing, over 4/5 of people say that yes, games can indeed be too hard. People citing their own experiences with bad mechanics and either courses or obstacles that were just too much for them to handle. And I think that's very much valid. Like I mentioned earlier, difficulty is subjective, but it looks like where it comes to die is when systems get in the way of the difficulty. So there really is precedence for the next question. You know it, I know it. It's time to talk about the dreaded difficulty selection. The classic capital G gamer discussion. It's a one that's rooted in gaming history as a way to gatekeep discussion for many people. And I think it's finally time we move past this and instead move into a different conversation altogether. It's finally time to start rebranding difficulty selection from a binary easy, normal, and hard, and instead start calling them different play styles instead. We can look at the original Gears of War way back when with how it labeled difficulties as casual, hardcore, or insane. Instead of being a binary tier, it makes it a bit easier to parse for people who maybe aren't as experienced with games or even a specific type of game like an intense action RPG to make a decision. It's also worth pointing out that developers often go out of their way to let players know which difficulty option is the preferred one by the developer, often by just stating outright recommended in the selection menu. Is there value in adding a sort of casual mode to a game such as Elden Ring? I'll make the argument that yes, there is value in it. I know many people are very much intrigued with the worlds that FromSoft creates because they are dark and brooding and are fully worth exploring. But for many, the appeal of the Souls games is that inherent barrier to entry. They are experiences designed to be difficult first and accommodating second. And this is also something that goes against the creator's intent. When the world of Elden Ring is supposed to be oppressive and overbearing on the player, a sort of easy mode kind of goes against the intent being expressed. There is merit in wanting a more casual experience for many people. I think players are smart enough to understand that there is nuance in the discussion overall. Sure, they might not get the same experience you did, but I think the average player is smart enough to understand why a game or director does things a certain way in order to make it stand out as a gaming experience and to elicit a certain reaction from the player. To say that a player won't understand the purpose of a game's atmosphere and direction just because they play it on an easier difficulty just feels childish in a way. Like, I'm sorry, my dude, some of us have lives, and as a result, we don't have the time some of these experiences require in order to see them to completion simply because of their difficulty. It's a dilemma for sure, but I think that's where I'll choose to die on this hill. Easy mode is okay. A casual mode is okay. Making things more accessible for others to enjoy is okay. If anyone with eyes can watch a movie or read a book, I think the same should be applicable to games. Will everyone agree with me? Oh, definitely not, and I'm fully aware of that, because there is a middle ground we can find in this discussion. Adding a casual mode to a game like Elden Ring can be a very nuanced thing. The game starts you on the hardest difficulty, but you have options below that can alter the game slightly in easier ways for people to get into the experience without as much friction. Damage numbers could stay the same, but having things like less stamina drain or more health healed via Estus are ways to make the game slightly easier for newcomers. Is that such a bad thing? If it were me, I would want as many people I know to play something I enjoy and talk about, because a game like this is precious to me, and I want to share it and see what other people get out of the experience. Difficulty will never be a one-size-fits-all solution, so that's where we come to. It's really up to you to decide if something is too hard or not, because there isn't an answer to this question. FromSoft games are made explicitly without difficulty options. They are created to deliver a specific catered experience of difficulty that expects you to explore, investigate, and die over and over again in order to learn. Let me make one thing clear though. I want you to understand that no one will think less of you if you play a game with mimic tears or a bleed build, because that is something that worked for you. That's why the game has so many options to choose from to begin with. FromSoft made the conscious decision to add so many elements so that the player has an opportunity to cater the difficulty how they want. It's sort of an extension of the casual mode I discussed earlier, but they're just never options that are explicitly told this is the easier option, but it's up to the player to discover them and see what works best for them. Let's just say that comparison is the thief of joy. If you constantly feel the the need to compare yourself and your performance to others in order to feel validation, you're in it for the wrong reason. I've struggled with that feeling all my life, so I understand the plight. But if someone makes fun of you for using mimic tears, they can suck a fat one. Instead of celebrating what you have achieved, they're attempting to minimize your accomplishments just because you didn't do it their way. And that's no way to talk to others in a medium we love, because it's also downplaying how they want to express themselves as a player. Gaming is a hobby that I love to share, and I think it's something that everyone should experience. And saying that someone sucks at something just because they don't experience it the way you did isn't a conversation. It's not even criticism. It's just rude. I think we can all learn a lesson from Miyazaki. In that same Guardian interview from earlier, Miyazaki said, quote, "In preparation for Shadow of the Erdtree, I played through the main story of Elden Ring. I want to preface this by saying I absolutely suck at video games. So my approach or playstyle was to use everything I have at my disposal, all the assistance, every scrap of aid that the game offers, and also the knowledge that I have as the architect of the game. The freedom, the open world nature of Elden Ring perhaps lowered the barrier of entry, and I might be the one who's benefiting the most from that as a player more than anyone else," end quote. If Miyazaki, by his own admission, sucks at the games he makes, then that's something even the worst player of a FromSoft game can learn. That even though he plays poorly, it still doesn't deter him from continuously pushing forward. Sure, no difficulty will ever be perfect. Even Miyazaki acknowledges this and knows it better than even us, because he sees these games to completion. Nothing is ever perfect, but he really does try his best to make his games difficult but fair at the same time. Making a game is hard, and so is balancing what makes it work to find that flow state for the player. But the onus is not just on the developer. It is also on the player to determine why they are playing the game in the first place. And everyone has their limits. It's all about managing expectations and knowing what to expect. When you go into a game, it's imperative that you manage those expectations, but also be open to frustration, because without conflict, we lose the element of enjoyment from the experience. Difficulty isn't a solved problem, and it never will be. And if someone is having trouble with something, give them encouragement. It can go a long way. Having a good mentality about difficulty is half the battle. So if you ever feel discouraged by a game or even feel down because of it, it's okay to just stop. If it makes you feel bad, it's not worth doing. And if you get frustrated or down on yourself because of it, no one will ever think less of you because of it. Just remember, nothing is ever truly impossible. There's always a tomorrow and another chance for you to try. And if it's too hard for you, then that's okay. Remember that. Hey, thanks for watching all the way to the end here. It really means a lot. I would really love to hear what you think about the video in the comment section down below, and any thoughts you might have about game difficulty. And while you're down there, maybe hit that like and subscribe button if you liked the video. It's those things that help get the video out there and keep the discussion going to the gaming community. I have other videos in the hopper, but these will take more time to put together. I will also put together smaller videos in the meantime, because I love creating smaller think pieces in my free time when I have it. And if you really like what I do here, consider becoming a channel member and help me continue doing what I love. This is a part-time hobby for me, so any support you can throw my way is greatly appreciated. And as always, this has been Testing Triangles. Thank you for watching.